I give.
Picture this. A scrappy $3 million comedy about a disaster of a fraternity somehow becomes one of the highest-grossing films of its era, reshapes an entire genre, and turns Toga Party into a permanent part of the English language. That's Animal House, released by Universal Pictures in the summer of 1978. On the surface, it's just food fights, road trips gone wrong, and a horse that doesn't survive a college dean's office. But the story behind the camera is just as chaotic as anything happening on screen. Real fistfights, real bands, a script that started out far darker than anyone would guess, and a leading man who turned down what would have been a life-changing payday. Let's dig into 15 facts about Animal House that even longtime fans might not know. Stick around for the final one, because the way this movie ends quietly rewrote the rulebook for movie comedies for decades to come. Before a single frame of Animal House was shot, the film almost never got made at all. Universal Studio leadership took one look at the script and wanted nothing to do with it. It was considered too crude, and the writing team, relative unknowns at the time, didn't inspire much confidence either. The project was handed one condition for survival: land a genuine movie star, or the whole thing gets shelved. Director John Landis reached out to Donald Sutherland, an actor he'd crossed paths with years earlier on a different production. Sutherland already had a real resume, prestige dramas and war films behind him, and the moment his name was attached, the studio's hesitation disappeared and the budget got approved. Sutherland signed on for a small role, a philosophy professor who appears for only a couple of days of shooting. Here's the part that stings in hindsight. Sutherland was given a choice on how to be paid: a flat fee in the tens of thousands, or a small cut of the film's total earnings. Convinced the movie was a long shot at best, he took the guaranteed check. Animal House went on to pull in well over $100 million against its tiny budget, and decades of reruns, home video, and licensing kept the money flowing long after. By most estimates, the profit share option would have been worth many millions more than what he actually received. The actor whose name got the movie greenlit in the first place ended up watching its success from the sidelines. While Animal House was filming on location, its breakout star wasn't fully there, not in the way you'd expect. John Belushi was simultaneously a full-time cast member of Saturday Night Live, and for weeks the production had to work around a genuinely brutal commute. He'd spend the early part of the week on set in Oregon, then fly across the country to be in New York for live television rehearsals and the Saturday broadcast, before flying right back to resume filming. This went on for roughly 2 months straight, during the fall of 1977. It's the kind of schedule that would exhaust almost anyone, but by every account from people who worked alongside him, Belushi barely seemed to notice. Even during his limited downtime in Oregon, he wasn't resting. He was out exploring the local music scene, where he built a friendship with the regional blues musician that would later feed directly into a completely different project of his. Behind the scenes at SNL, this double duty caused real friction, since another castmate had been offered a role in the film and the show's producer wasn't thrilled about losing him too. That actor ultimately chose to stay with the show rather than risk leaving it short-staffed. Belushi, though, kept flying back and forth for the entire run of a shoot that was compressed into just over a month. One of the film's most memorable blink-and-you'll-miss-it moments involves a folk singer strumming quietly at a party, right before a much larger character destroys his guitar against a wall without a word of explanation. That singer wasn't a random extra. He was an actual working musician with a genuine radio hit to his name, and a personal friend of the director who'd appeared in an earlier Landis project. The scene wasn't part of the original script at all. It was added once filming was underway. The performer knew going in that his guitar was scripted to get smashed, but nothing quite prepared him for how physically intense the moment actually felt once cameras rolled and Belushi came barreling toward him at full force. With only 2 guitars available for the scene, the crew had almost no margin for error, and the whole bit was wrapped in just 2 takes. The musician kept the guitar from that second take, had it signed by the cast, and has held onto it ever since. Even the song choice was strategic rather than sentimental. It was a centuries-old folk tune sitting in the public domain, meaning nobody had to pay a licensing fee for a piece of music that was about to be smashed against a wall for laughs. The cafeteria scene where Belushi stuffs his cheeks with food and smashes them, mimicking a bursting pimple, has become one of the most quoted gags in the whole movie. It wasn't written, rehearsed, or planned in any way. The director had been deliberately trimming down Belushi's dialogue throughout the shoot, hoping to lean into pure physical comedy instead of scripted lines. So when he noticed Belushi loading up an absurd amount of food onto his tray between takes, he simply told the camera operator to keep rolling and see what happened. What followed was completely improvised, catching the other actors at the table off guard in real time. Their shocked, disgusted reactions weren't performances. They genuinely had no idea what was coming, which is exactly why the moment reads as so authentic on screen. That single unscripted gag, born out of a college cafeteria and a tray of mashed potatoes, is widely credited as helping establish the template that gross-out comedy would follow for years afterward. The director wanted the actors playing the film's central fraternity to genuinely bond before cameras started rolling. So he brought that group of actors to the filming location nearly a week ahead of schedule with no rehearsal scheduled, just time to hang out. During that stretch, several of them ended up at an actual campus fraternity party that hadn't technically been arranged with the hosts. Things escalated quickly into a real altercation with a group of football players, and by the next morning at least one actor needed dental repair from a local dentist before filming could even begin. Nobody planned for a genuine fight to break out, but it left the group with an authentic camaraderie that no amount of scripted bonding could have replicated. Meanwhile, the actors cast as the rival, more uptight fraternity were kept deliberately isolated from the rest of the cast. No shared meals, no socializing allowed. One of those actors later described hearing the other group's parties happening down the hall at their shared motel and never once being invited. The genuine, visible tension between the two groups on screen wasn't entirely acting. A lot of it was real frustration bleeding through. Long before he became one of the most recognizable actors in Hollywood, one cast member playing a minor fraternity pledge was a 20-year-old still waiting tables, hoping for his big break. He landed the small role after the director asked him to embody a single vague adjective in his audition, and somehow nailed exactly the vibe that was wanted with almost no further direction needed. Then came the actual movie premiere. While his higher-profile castmates arrived in style and walked the red carpet, this young actor made his way to the theater on public transit. When he got there, security didn't recognize him, checked his ticket, and redirected him to seating nowhere near the rest of the cast. At the after-party, by his own account, nobody believed he'd actually been in the film at all. He's called it one of the most disheartening nights of his career, which makes it all the more remarkable considering how thoroughly connected and celebrated he'd go on to become in the industry. The armored, skull-adorned vehicle that tears through the film's climactic parade sequence started out as a full-sized, heavy American sedan from the mid-1960s, thousands of pounds of old-fashioned steel construction. The problem was that the crew needed the car to look thoroughly wrecked on camera, and the vehicle simply refused to cooperate. It withstood crash after crash with barely a dent, forcing the crew to bring in heavy equipment just to physically beat the body into looking sufficiently destroyed for the shot. For the parade sequence itself, the car was rebuilt into an elaborate float, complete with a turret and a skull-faced grille, all hidden under an innocent-looking banner, a disguise so complete that it also blocked nearly all forward visibility for whoever was driving. The man behind the wheel was a veteran stunt performer with serious action film credentials, including doubling work on a famous motorcycle chase sequence in a decades-earlier war film. One of the actors, curious how the driver could possibly see the road, asked him directly and got a blunt answer. He couldn't see anything at all. That actor climbed in and rode along anyway, for no scripted reason whatsoever, just because he wanted to be part of it. In its earliest planning stages, the film's wish list of actors reads like a fantasy roster of the era's hottest sketch comedians, many of them from the same live sketch show Belushi was on. Nearly every name on that original list passed on the project or was talked out of it for one reason or another, leaving Belushi as essentially the only one from that original group who actually signed on. One particularly rising star was seriously being considered for a lead role, and the studio actually pushed the director to cast him. The director didn't want to, feeling the actor was already too famous for what was supposed to be an ensemble of complete unknowns. So at a lunch meeting with the actor and producers, the director subtly talked him out of it, praising a different, more star-driven project instead, and suggesting it would suit him far better. It worked exactly as intended. The actor walked away thinking this fraternity comedy was beneath him and later admitted regretting the decision once the film became a massive hit. The roles instead went to a group of genuine unknowns, which, completely by accident, is a big part of why the finished film feels like an actual fraternity instead of a vehicle for one big star. Cashing in fast on the film's success, a television network rushed out a spin-off series just months after the movie hit theaters, bringing back several cast members and even inventing a new sibling character to keep a signature nickname alive. Everyone came back except the actor who'd made the role famous in the first place. Network standards sanded down every rough edge from the film, adding a laugh track and softening the content until it was safe for a family time slot. Ratings started reasonably well, but constant battles with network censors led to its cancellation after just over a dozen episodes. Tucked inside that mostly forgotten show, though, were two names virtually nobody was paying attention to at the time. A 20-year-old actress appeared in a background role credited only by a generic nickname, one of her very first Hollywood credits, years before the string of major films and Oscar nominations that would define her career. And writing several of the spin-offs episodes was a young comedy writer who'd been contributing to the same magazine that spawned the original film, years away from directing some of the most beloved teen comedies of the following decade. The show didn't survive, but it quietly gave two future major names their earliest footholds in the industry. The version of this story that eventually became a light-hearted fraternity comedy went through several dramatically different drafts first. The earliest incarnation was an entirely different concept altogether, a satire centered on a teenage character loosely modeled on a notorious real-life cult leader, complete with drug-fueled gatherings and cult indoctrination themes. Unsurprisingly, that draft never made it past a studio desk. Even the director, brought on to read it, acknowledged it had genuinely clever material buried inside, but called it far too extreme to actually produce. The publisher overseeing the project reportedly gave blunt notes to tone down some of the more disturbing content and move the whole setting to a college campus instead. Once that shift happened, a new writer joined the team, someone who'd actually lived the fraternity experience firsthand and could ground the concept in real, lived-in details rather than shock value. Draft by draft, the unhinged energy of those earlier versions got reshaped into something an audience could actually root for instead of recoil from. The wild spirit never disappeared entirely. It just got redirected into a slovenly, rule-breaking fraternity brother who somehow became the most beloved figure in the finished film. Finding a real university willing to host the production turned into its own ordeal. Several schools that initially agreed to let the crew film ultimately backed out once university leadership actually read the script. One school's president had personally been part of a decision years earlier at a different university to turn down a request to film another now iconic movie on campus, a choice he'd apparently regretted ever since, watching that production shoot elsewhere instead. When this new opportunity came along, he was determined not to make the same mistake twice. After having an assistant read through the script and report back that it was crude but genuinely funny, and after consulting with student leadership, he agreed to let filming proceed, and went well beyond a simple yes. He opened up his own campus office to be used as a set, including for a scene involving a horse that famously does not survive the encounter. The access came with a six-figure adjacent fee and one specific condition: the university's name should never be directly mentioned in the finished film. That particular request didn't really stick in spirit. Even if the name itself stayed out of the dialogue, the school remains inseparably linked to the movie to this day, complete with stadium traditions that echo scenes from the film decades later. The chaos on screen wasn't invented out of thin air. Much of it came straight from the writer's actual college years. The larger-than-life central character was assembled from real people the writers had known, including a fraternity brother whose actual party trick involved smearing condiments on himself and crawling around biting people. The three credited writers each drew from their own very different fraternity experiences at three separate universities, blending a wide range of real-life misbehavior into a single script. One character in particular wasn't just loosely inspired by real life. he essentially was real life. The character's name was literally the writer's own college nickname, used by his actual fraternity brothers between the late 1950s and early 60s, and that same writer even appears briefly on screen as a different character entirely. Multiple other character names came directly from real fraternity brothers he'd known personally. Even the fictional house's colorful nickname supposedly traces back to a genuinely chaotic real incident involving an attempted chicken dinner that ended abruptly and dramatically. The writers, in short, didn't need to invent much of anything. They just needed to remember it accurately. Rather than hiring someone known for comedic scoring, the filmmakers brought on a veteran composer best known for sweeping, prestigious dramatic films, a decision the studio wasn't thrilled about. The director had a personal connection to the composer going back years and pushed hard to bring him on anyway, giving him one clear instruction: score the film exactly as if it were a serious drama, regardless of how ridiculous the events on screen actually were. The result is a soundtrack that treats every absurd moment with total sincerity, sweeping. Heroic music underscores scenes of pure vandalism, and a rallying speech that makes almost no logical sense gets scored like a general addressing troops before battle. That deliberate mismatch between what audiences hear and what they're actually watching is a huge part of where the comedy lands. The approach worked so well that this same composer quickly became a go-to name for other major film comedies throughout the years that followed, effectively establishing dramatic scoring as a comedic tool that's still used today. The R&B group that performs at a rowdy off-campus club in the film was invented purely to give the fraternity brothers a reason to wander somewhere they clearly didn't belong. But the actor fronting the group on screen wasn't actually singing at all. The vocals were dubbed by a separate studio singer, and the lip-syncing performance was convincing enough that almost nobody questioned it for years. Standing quietly in the background as a bass player with no lines was a young musician who, at the time, was simply background talent hired to round out the band visually. That same musician would go on to become a multiple Grammy-winning blues artist in his own right. Once the film became a hit, audiences didn't just want to quote it. They wanted to see the band perform live. The actor who played the frontman ended up purchasing the rights to use the band's name, assembled an actual working lineup with some family members included, and toured genuinely for years afterward, regularly performing dozens of shows annually to crowds who wanted to relive a scene from a fictional club, at a fictional college, in a movie that was never supposed to spawn a real band in the first place. A few years before Animal House came out, another coming-of-age film had introduced a device that felt fresh at the time: closing text cards explaining, earnestly, what happened to each character after the story wrapped up. It was heartfelt and sincere. Animal House looked at that formula and decided to turn it completely into a punchline instead. After the parade has been destroyed and every authority figure has been thoroughly humiliated, the film freezes on each major character and reveals their eventual fate in a rapid string of title cards. No sentimental wrap-up, no closure, just outcomes. And those outcomes are gleefully absurd. The character with the worst academic record in the entire film, whose signature achievement was an exploding mouthful of mashed potatoes, ends up in a position of serious political power. Meanwhile, the buttoned-up, rule-following characters, who spent the whole film looking down on everyone else, meet a string of embarrassing, even tragic fates. The message is blunt. The misfits win, the uptight rule followers lose, in the span of about 30 seconds of freeze frames. Buried in there is one final personal touch. The character most directly based on one of the writers ends up, according to his own freeze-frame fate, working at the very same magazine that writer actually worked for in real life. That closing format, using absurd fate reveals for comedic effect rather than genuine sentiment, went on to become one of the most widely copied endings in film comedy, borrowed by countless movies in the decades since. What started as a parody of another film's sincere ending became the blueprint nearly everyone else eventually followed. And that wraps up 15 facts about a movie that almost didn't get made, filmed on a campus that almost said no, starring actors nobody had heard of yet, some of whom would barely scrape by for years afterward before becoming household names. Behind every food fight and toga chant was a small mountain of real chaos, real risk, and real people writing down their own college disasters and turning them into one of the most influential comedies ever made. Which of these caught you off guard? Let us know. And until next time, take one more trip back to Faber College.